With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV. I'm Fahima Mohammad, your relationship coach for SingleMuslim.com. I'd like to welcome all of you today watching Single Muslim Live. We have been doing this show for quite some time, and I just want to say I thank all of you and appreciate all of your viewers, especially the ones that email us, that comment, send in all your questions. We really do hear you, and that's why we have guests every week with different topics to address your current situation, your challenges finding a spouse. And as we are sponsored by SingleMuslim.com, we're here to help in aid so that you are guided in the right direction in order to find that perfect partner. We do find in today's society that there are so many factors that do hinder us from finding that special one. And it can come from external factors like society, social media, as well as the fact that we've also addressed topics like the fact that we are taking on our careers for a lot longer in life, so that we can actually have maybe marriages which is a lot later in life, which is not what it used to be traditionally. So those are some of the values and some of the things that we have discussed previously. And today we're going to be more specific with regards to the pressures that we are under when we are trying to find a spouse, especially when it comes from our culture, tradition, and parents. As much as we have to understand that they do have some guidance and they do give us the insight that we do require, but, with this generation, things have changed, and a lot of us find it a bit difficult and a little bit confusing with regards to where are we right now in the West especially, and how does that also coincide with our traditional values from the generation before us. And it's not just our parents. We have also the society and community around us that expect, especially people coming from our faith, in a particular way. So, inshallah, I just want to just highlight that these topics are here because at the end of the day, we are here to make sure that your issues, your struggles are addressed. And we have professionals, experts, and people every single day from every day and all walks of life to come in to discuss this so that we can give you some more awareness and insight. So, inshallah, all I want to say is that, again, I do appreciate all of you. We are going to continue the discussion very soon. I just want to remind the viewers, wherever you're streaming from around the world, I welcome you again. And if you do want to join in the conversation, you are more than welcome. And you can direct where this goes by sending in your comments on whatever platform you're streaming from right now. Or if you want to send in a free WhatsApp message, the number's at the bottom of your screen on 07950 797017. Or we can actually also have you call in straight into the studio and speak directly to myself on 01924 231 083, and that could be absolutely amazing to hear your voices right now. We were talking over the last couple of weeks about the challenges of male and female in the Muslim community and how they are coping in finding a spouse. And just to recap on some of the issues that were raised there was a lot of the people in today's generation looking for marriage do find that it is more about wanting a career first. And when you want a career, that is amazing. It is so amazing, especially for women nowadays who are feeling empowered and they want to have a career and they want to obviously continue with their studies to actually building themselves. We just want to also highlight that even though you have a career, even though you are studying, it is also alongside that that you can actually look for a spouse. And if anything, that can maybe enhance your actual career path. Remember, we do come from faith and belief, and a lot of us are on a different journey, which is absolutely fine. But when we do certain things in accordance to the guidance and the teachings of the way in which we believe in, this can sometimes actually help us go even further in our studies and even further in our careers. And I understand that a lot of questions also come about as to what is the right age for marriage. I've been asked this many times. And the only thing I can say is if you understood what actually marriage entails, it's a responsibility. It's you understanding your rights and your partner's rights and able to fulfill that. And if you are able to do that at an age where you are mature, obviously in abidance with the law of the land that we're living in, then definitely we can, hopefully have you married as soon as you feel that maturity within yourself. So this is some of the things that we have been discussing. But like I said, it's really important that we home in on certain topics to make it more specific, because in our society today, we are faced with some real issues which can hinder us from actually moving forward. So I just want to say that while I've been speaking, I would also like to introduce my guest for tonight. Salamu alaikum. We have Dr. Sheeza Mohsin. Salamu alaikum. How are you? No, it's an absolute pleasure. It's so lovely to see you. We've had an amazing conversation before. And you know what? I feel so honored to be sitting here and having you have this discussion with me. I was just explaining to our viewers that we have been discussing many topics, and today we're concentrating on the cultural and the parent pressure on the individual that is about to obviously get married. You are very well versed in this. You've written about this. So I just want to firstly have you introduce what is it that's really the hindrance when it comes to the cultural pressure? Like, what does that actually mean?
It means a lot of things for many people. When you think about finding a mate or a partner, you're looking at so many elements of a relationship. And we wish that just by virtue of calling ourselves Muslim, we would all be cookie cutter in our family disposition, in our faith following, in our own personalities, but that's not the case. So when you think of any religion or any cultural community, I think of a spectrum. And so where you are versus where your family of origin is can sometimes be so different. And it is really important, because if you just evaluate a person based on your own personal likes, you can like or love many people. But when you're looking at marriage or finding a long-term committed relationship, you start thinking, can I make a life with this person? And that's when you have to keep in mind, well, can I take them to my family's home? Will they adjust there? Can I interact with them and my cousins and my relatives and our social community? And so many other elements start playing a role, and the decision making becomes very complicated. So balancing the two can sometimes feel very cumbersome, especially when the parents are also very protective of this very major decision in life.
That is so true. And I know you've highlighted quite a lot there, but again, we're going to go a little bit more deeper into some of the actual problems. Do you think that because maybe living in the West has created more of the cultural pressures, or do you think that even if we are back in certain home country land, that it is less?
So that's a very good question. I will tell you what I have noticed. I've had the pleasure of working with families in the UK as well, is that a lot of times when you are thinking of an immigrant family, a family that uproots itself and goes and makes a life in a different country, what I have noticed by and large and is that their memories and their perspective of the home country kind of gets locked in to the year that they immigrated.
That is so
So a
true.
lot of times when the families, the kids hear stories about, well, this is what Pakistan is like and India is like and Bangladesh is like, and the children grow up hearing it. And then when you have your first trip, you're going, Mom, they're way more advanced than you thought they were.
That is so
Or
true.
the children who are coming from abroad find that they look like they're the most rural, the most backward, because their home environment reflects a lot of the decade or the year that the parents immigrated. And if there hasn't been movement back and forth from the host culture, then you're kind of locked into this bubble of an imaginary culture that, when you interact with it, has already moved on. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes so much sense, and I've actually said that myself. I've noticed this myself. Looking at the generations that are here, they're kind of stuck in a capsule, a time capsule from when they left, generations before, and they want to continue that, not realizing that actually in their home countries, they've actually also moved forward. It doesn't mean that just because you're living in the West, we are ahead of time. Even in the Middle East, or in Asia or in Africa, they are also moving ahead. It's just that when we come to a different country, we kind of stay stuck. So that is absolutely true. Why do you think that is, that there is so much fear around change and keeping these traditions and cultures, that we feel that there is sometimes even a force on the individual that we love and we care and like you said, we protect, but then we still want to make sure that that is the way we have to move forward? I've only even learned this myself in certain South Asian families, that this is how they live, even if they've been in England, for example, for 30 years. Those cultural norms are so important and embedded, like as if it's like some agreement that is can never be broken. Why is that? And it's not even anything to do with religion.
And so there are two elements of your question. I'll start with the first one. It is so natural, Fahima. Think about it. When people immigrate, think about yourself having, I am assuming you were born and raised in the UK. If you have to pack up and suddenly leave for a totally different culture with the possibility of never coming back, there is a sense of loss. And I will extend to say there's a sense of trauma. And, when you've been robbed of what you thought was your own, you try to hold on to whatever you have left. And so it becomes like a dear item for when you grieve the loss of something. And it's more of an ambiguous loss than, a person dying, but then there's that attachment to it and a loyalty to it. That's so hard to explain in words, but when having worked with so many multicultural and South Asian families, and you're right, it's a global thing. They could move anywhere in the world, and there is that sense of loss. So then what the children experience is a very high intensity loyalty to something. Like there are these simple conversations that you will hear between a daughter and a mom, where the daughter is like, well, that doesn't look fashionable. And the mom feels violated. When I was growing up, this was the best item. And the child is saying, Mom, things have moved on in that country. Like, get with the program. And mom is very sentimental and attached emotionally to that memory that she's trying to recreate. So a lot
No,
of
that's
it,
very true.
so a lot of it is that sense of loss, and that just creates this intensity of holding on. Now, while it is understandable that they would do that, it's very hard for the child to make sense of it because they did not choose where they were going to be born and raised. And so they have a very interesting dynamic and a code switch that happens. So they become, Muslim Pakistani, Muslim Bangladeshi the moment they walk in from school or college at 4 p.m. But from that 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. time, they're British. They're interacting with the host culture. They're identifying their sense of fashion, who they like. Everything is influenced by that culture. So they develop this bicultural identity and they don't have a name for it. And it's so hard for them to understand themselves in relation to their family, in relation to what they are drawn to.
You know, you've raised so many interesting points right now, and you're absolutely right. Of course, there's a fear and wanting to hold on, but at the same time, we do have so many different identities, which sometimes, like you mentioned, we cannot really understand where do we fit in. So what do you think the solution is when it comes to that? Because when it comes to marriage, this is what we're really having an issue with the cultural pressures. What are the actual cultural pressures? It's not necessarily that you have to marry from your own background, or is it much more deeper than that? Like the lifestyle, where do you live, what language you speak, the food you eat, or the people that you choose? How do you see that in your experience?
So, from having worked with a lot of, I will call them mixed culture couples, whereas they could both be Indian, for example, but one of them was born and raised in the UK or the US, while the other was born and raised in the host country. And the parents are so excited, and you marry them. Well, there is so much difference in perspective. There's so much difference in what one finds romantic and the other doesn't. There's so much difference in what one looks at when they think of a great, robust marriage versus what the other thinks. So, a lot of things that are cultural play a role. And I'm going to bring in faith because, based on my observation and my experience, faith becomes very tricky because it goes back and forth with culture. And a lot of times those lines are very blurred. Because if you notice Islam in its teachings, it's a very open, robust religion that really promotes equality, relationship strength, spending time in your marriage, on your relationship. The culture is different.
Yeah.
So the culture has a lot of the in-law dynamic, the gender difference, the gender bias, and all of those things start playing a role. And like you said, I can go on and on, so please tell me to stop or elaborate on something.
No,
But
carry on.
So your socioeconomic background, your education background, the family of origin, whether you come from a work outside the home mom's family or work inside the home, the expectations that are passed on look very different. And if there is a mismatch there, it makes things really hard for the poor couple that's just trying to understand themselves. And what you notice then is most of the arguments are really based in the family system, not between the individuals.
That is so true. And it just makes me highlight even what I've raised many times before in the past, that actually the culture keeps us behind to a certain extent. We need to obviously enjoy culture, but when it actually hinders the lifestyle of us moving forward. And as we know, if you're in personal development, to have this growth mindset, it really does hold us back to a certain extent. And the other thing is, relationships has also evolved over time regardless. Like you mentioned, there are certain expectations, but the expectations have changed just within the individual. Before, you obviously married for status purpose, to obviously get a particular, family member to actually help you out in your actual, family background or whatever it may be. And then it was love. And then now it's more about fulfillment and support and basically everything. So do you not think that with these cultural norms and the pressure that parents put on the individual, how is that now in this day and age, currently, how is that going to still remain with all these differences that are existing and continuously evolving?
That's a very deep question, and I wish I had a perfect answer for you, but I will tell you that first, my disclaimer, there are families that have progressed, and I see many healthy family systems. So I don't want to put everyone in the same box. So absolutely, the progressive families are doing a remarkable job. You see a completely different role of the mother-in-law. You see a completely different role of the husband. which is more the traditional areas of, conflict within a relationship. But I will tell you that I'm so sad sometimes to see that those challenges still exist. And the challenges of adjusting to the family system are real. They are tough for the girls. And I will also tell you it's very tough for the boy in the family as well, because the expectations suddenly change. And I'll give you a simple example. So traditionally, men were kept out of any kind of interaction that would develop their social emotional skills. The boys were told, go out, play cricket on the street, hang out with your uncles. And, so a lot of like male gender based exposure, right? The segregation kind of promotes it as well sometimes. And then the moment they get married, it's like overnight, the expectation is that they will have a PhD in balancing all these relationships. And everyone is disappointed at them. And if they listen to their wife too much, that's a problem. If they listen to mom too much, that's a problem. If they are trying to be accommodating to the wife, well, they seem to be okay with it. But then mom points out, how dare you do this? This is so ridiculous. And suddenly their frame changes. So it's a very chaotic, confusing time for these couples who are trying to settle into a new relationship. And it's so tough for me to see them in that space. And of course, for those that do have the means and the resources to work with someone like me, it becomes easier. But boy, that challenge is very present.
No, 100%. I agree with you. I just want to remind the viewers, if you do want to message and speak to myself or the doctor tonight, it's an amazing opportunity for you to call in. You can call in anonymously if you wish, ask any questions if you desire, or we can continue as we are, but I would love to hear your voices or your messages today. Again, Dr. Zisha, I want to find out, do you think that the culture has more pressure on male or female, or do you think it's as equal?
So I will say, by and large, there's definitely more pressure on females for multiple reasons. And that's not just a cultural component, it's a global element right now. Because women and their whole perspective, their careers, their lives, and what they find valuable is changing. So definitely the pressure is there, especially because it seems like there is an element of finding a new normal, finding what works in that family system. So if a woman wants to work outside the home, does she still carry the household responsibility? Does she still walk home and then everybody dumps all the responsibility on her? Or is there equity, just like income, if she's bringing in an income where the husband will also chip into the chores? So that becomes an issue. Then having expectations to manage from in-laws, even from your own family. There's a lot of guilt. So culturally, we have a lot of guilt that we use as a culture. And I noticed this in, American millennials, British families as well, that, there's always, it's an if-then mentality, I call it. If you choose something that you want to do for yourself, then you are not loyal to your family. If you are choosing to go on a date with your husband, then you are not respecting your in-laws. So there isn't abundance that I can go on a date with my wife or husband and still take care of my family. So there is a lot of judgment. I don't know if that's making sense.
No, it does. It's so real. I hear these cases a lot, and it's actually really detrimental. I've heard stories, and there are case studies which are real, where the child, now obviously an adult, was obviously manipulated and blackmailed to actually marry a particular background, which is what the family have chosen. And the thing is, the mom will either cry and, sort of say, you have to do this, you have to, do what I, require, what I need, you have to please your mother. And, the guy will go ahead. But then years later, or even months later, a lot sooner than you expect, then there's a lot of problems. And then, you know, they're already there, married. They're already there in that commitment. And I hear this again and again. And I don't understand, as much as we're protecting our children and we love the fact that, you know, we want them to take the next stage in life. But then there's so much, I would say, like, I can't even say the word in a way that's going to actually be okay for people to handle, but I'll just say there's compromise and there's also blackmail. Let me just be out there, okay? There's blackmail as to how you need to get married today in accordance to tradition and culture, which is actually tormenting that married person. And like you said, we are generalizing. It is a very small amount of people maybe, but it exists and exists today, even in the West, where parents are getting involved to a sense where they might even manipulate their children just to make sure that they do it in a particular way.
You know, there is, and I think you've nailed it. There is a lot of pressure, I will tell you. And, you know, growing up, we would hear from our Christian friends about this thing called Catholic guilt. And we would laugh about it and say, you know what, there's Muslim guilt as well. So, you know, it changes culture and religion, but definitely the shame and guilt model is very, very prevalent. And it's interesting because I see it being very sophisticated in educated families and very gruff in not so educated families, but it is there. And so that parenting by guilt and emotional blackmail is very prevalent. But it was very, very sensitive of you to use the word compromise. I will say it is very toxic sometimes. Yes, and it really 100%. Destroys the fabric of a good, healthy relationship. And then these children have so much resentment against their parents. And it shows up in passive aggressive.
Actually, as you've actually mentioned that, I do have a question on WhatsApp and we'll continue. So we do have a statement.
Go ahead.
How do you make your parents understand that you want to marry outside of the family? That is a very common question that we do get. What's your thoughts on that?
So I wish I could give you a cookie cutter response on that, because it's a very difficult thing to do versus for me to just say, oh, we'll talk to them. You know, it's so funny. So many of my South Asian clients are like, you know, when they go to a Western therapist and they're like, well, just have an open conversation. And they're like, we're laughing saying that doesn't exist in our culture. So please come back again with something. So I will say two things. One of them is that you have to understand the cultural background of your parents. You have to understand the language. You know how they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans. You have to really be very mindful and sensitive to the cultural nuances of how you present the information. And again, unfortunately, I won't have a perfect answer for you, but I will say that using force and being as forceful as your parents is probably going to be the least successful. It is really important to not let the situation escalate. So no walk away and no power play. So, you know, a lot of times what happens is because of that shame and guilt model, a lot of times there are intense exits, there's intense threats, and a lot of intensive negative behavior that shows up in the family. And my recommendation is if you do that, you know, parents might be scared, but that just creates more problems. So don't do that. And try to use a more diplomatic, centered approach. Also, it's very, very important that you understand the limitations of your family system as you create that space to talk to your parent.
Perfect.
I wish I could say,
I know you're trying to answer the question, but we actually have them more coming in now. So we do have another comment.
Go ahead.
Well, the thing is, we have a comment saying that father figures add more pressure than mothers do. Do you think that's correct?
So it depends on the background of the father's family, I would say, because so many times I want to acknowledge and credit the progressive fathers we have in our culture now, who are educating their daughters. who are very open-minded and who are very supportive. Now, I will tell you, again, think of that immigration bubble. Like when I've interacted with families in the UK, I'll speak specific to, and of course I've read, work that has been done on families there. And what I've found consistent is there is a subculture. So there is a London family culture. There is a Manchester family culture.
Yes.
There is a, Birmingham family culture. There is, all of those. There's a Bradford culture. Very different elements and nuances to those family systems. So I will say that that is also very telling. And what you have to understand, I'm not telling you to agree with your parents per se, but understand that we come from a collective culture. So if you were to isolate your dad, and if that pressure is coming from dad, it would not be that big a deal. But this is dad going to masjid, and the 30 other people and all the judgments about those 30 other people's gossips about other people's family that they're hearing. And so it keeps perpetuating this fear.
Right.
And that's that imaginary or real audience of the community's rejection of them that makes that strictness even more strong. So I would say, I invite you to think that it's not just dads. Sometimes it's moms. It all depends on the family system.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much for those questions and comments that are coming through so far. And I will try and get through to most of them as we go along the conversation. We do have Brother Hussein on line 1. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How you doing, sisters?
Very well, thank you. You're live on British Muslim TV. What would you like to say?
Thank you. As a brother, I've been listening to the conversation, and my generation, I'd like to give you my perspective.
Absolutely, go ahead.
You're discussing cultural pressures. You also mentioned the pressures around the family, our uncles, aunts, our relatives. But these are people who've actually, over centuries, have educated us and protected us, with the cultural heritage that we have. And that has also been beneficial to us, especially as, we've improved and developed our friendships and relationships. But similarly, and this is my understanding now, we also have cultural pressures such as liberalism, materialism, individualism. These can be just as equally as detrimental as the other cultural pressures which you're mentioning. So I just thought, in the interest of balance, we need to understand that it's not just your family, which is regarded as cultural pressures, but there are also pressures out there, societal cultural pressures as well, which we're having to contend with.
So I couldn't agree more with what the caller just said. Absolutely, there is so much value in how the family brings you up. There's so much value in that culture. And absolutely, it's real. Materialism is real. The individualism, and that was very interesting that you mentioned that, because our culture is collective. And you are raised in a culture, in the British culture, that may be more individualistic. And the pressure that we're discussing today happens when both partners or potential partners belong to different groups on that spectrum. Because there may be alignment. So it's a great idea to really check that. Because, everyone has their own truth about where they stand and what they value. And it's dear to them. Family is dear. So finding a partner that understands where you come from and what is valuable to you is going to be critical in that scenario and in that selection of a partner. So I want to make sure that, there is an understanding that in relationships, absolutely, there is a center of what culturally we think is right, what we are aligned with, but everybody within that group is different. You're different as an individual. You're different as a person. Your personality is reflective of your upbringing, what you've been exposed to. And so that looks different for everyone. And everyone, most people feel that their truth is the truth. And that's where the conflict shows up and plays a role. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, that
So,
was a really interesting caller out there. So, what more would you like to say for that, Zisha?
so yeah, I'm going to say that, you know, this is a really good point, and I hope that as we're talking about family culture, that there is not that thought that family is non-supportive. Many families are very supportive. A lot of times when you are looking to bring a person into your family system, everything that you do within your family system is normal for you. It may
Mm-hmm.
not be normal for the person coming in, and that's not, I'm not talking about just the women coming into the husband's culture, but the same goes for the opposite as well. That normal sometimes looks different, and you've never looked at it that way because it's a completely different lens that's looking at your family. And so instead of making a conflict out of that, a robust, healthy relationship is made when you are looking to understand each other and understand where the person is coming from and have compatibility and compromise in understanding each other. And that's why that selection becomes so important.
No, absolutely. And the other thing is, as the caller mentioned at the beginning, that our parents are there to actually also be that extra pair of eyes, and they do have the experience. I also have heard of cases where when couples did not listen to their families, then there was problem. So we do have another question actually on one of the platforms on WhatsApp stating, what advice do you have for a young woman who struggles with the pressures of cultural conflict? How would you overcome that? What do you
Well,
think?
my short answer would be it depends on the type of conflict, because there are
Hmm.
so many elements of cultural
What are the main
conflict.
ones?
So a lot of them, because you said the person who's asking the question is a woman, I would say there are a lot of gender-based conflicts because you are being raised and you live in a culture that's more individualistic, that's more open to what women's rights and women's freedoms look like. And then culturally, depending on your family system, depending on your family of origin, that may look different for you.
Hmm.
So the gender based conflict sometimes comes up a lot for women. I will give you an example. When boys and girls grow up in the same house, a lot of times the brothers are given more privileges than the sisters. So the brothers can go out, but the sisters cannot go out. If
Hmm.
the brother, in more moderate to liberal families, if the brother says they like somebody outside, it's more acceptable than when the girl says she likes somebody outside of the family or the culture and so forth. So there are those differences in how both genders are handled. That's one very big one. Then the rest of, go ahead. You were going to say
No, I was just
something.
going to say, when you were talking about the cultural pressures on women, I was thinking also, is it mainly to do with the fact that when women are getting married, it has to be within their own background and caste, for example? Do you think is that was one of the main sort of pressure?
So some of those things definitely alleviate some conflict. So as you know, that a lot of times in the South Asian culture and the Muslim culture, marrying cousins is acceptable, which is not a very popular idea in the West. And one of the reasons people do that is they're already familiar with the family system. They know how
Right.
everybody is. They have that cultural muscle of understanding how things are done, what this one likes, what this one doesn't like. There's so much history. So automatically
It's
the
safe.
couple is set up for success, and it
Yeah,
minimizes the conflict to just individual issues because everything else
absolutely.
is already taken care of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. That
and
makes sense. We actually have another question or comment which is on WhatsApp coming through. They're coming in fast right now, saying my parents agreed a verbal engagement when I was young with my cousin. We are both grown up now, and I don't want to marry him. Why does this exist in the Asian culture? Have you come across something similar, like those sort of stories, what I've just said?
So there's a lot of that still happens. And I will tell you that, there is a historic element to these kinds of arrangements. And there were
Mm,
many, many different reasons why families would do that. A lot of it was for protection. A lot
yeah,
of it used to be for economic support. A lot of them were financially driven. A lot of them were to make sure that the family's wealth, the family's honor stayed contained. So those vetting things were done. And again, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with them. I want to be respectful to every family system. It is what it is, it's their truth. But I also understand that then comes the package deal of immigrating. And a lot of times when families are immigrating for a better life, they feel it's like a buffet and they can pick and choose what they're going to expose their child to. So one of the popular ones is, I'll just educate my child. Well, what they don't realize is when you educate your child, it's not just academic education, it's life
yeah,
education. You're
yeah.
immersed in a different culture. You're exposed to a different norm. I remember, and I use this example a lot, where, in my family in Pakistan, there's this tradition of seeing if the help in the family, servants and so forth, their children want to go to school. Well, a lot of times we would on and off have these people who would refuse it. And it used to completely fascinate me why somebody would refuse education. It could give them a better life. And one of the women said that you have to understand that it changes them, and then they will be misfits in both worlds.
I guess they don't understand human mind and behavior and the way in which we do evolve generally. That's just a natural form and a natural state. So I think we do need a lot more education. What would be your advice for somebody who is in that situation? And, are there any tips like that they can actually go through? I know you want to be respectful, but obviously even as a coach and even being in these situations, there are certain techniques, there are certain guidelines and guidance that maybe can be made aware. What would you suggest?
So my suggestion would be work with a therapist or coach. And why I'm saying that is that I don't want to generalize a solution. Every
Yeah,
solution, for example, that I come up with in my practice is completely custom designed for that
yes,
family. And every family is
absolutely.
different. So I wish I could
Yeah,
say that what I'm going to say here will apply to like 4 million families. Unfortunately, that's not, or even 50 families. It doesn't even apply to 5, because there's so many little elements of that family system. So I would say, it's modern day. You have people like yourself, Fahima, or myself, and many, many other who understand our culture now. And so go seek help, because you will be able to untangle what the issue is. You'll be able to really understand where your fear is coming from, where the family's fear is coming from,
yeah,
and come up with a response that is respectful of your family while it also respects your wishes. So we can have the
yeah.
best win-win solution possible.
No, you know what you've said, I love it, because especially as a coach myself, when people want that kind of general advice, and it's exactly definitely something that we do here at SingleMuslim.com. We give these kinds of guidelines to specific questions, to specific emails. That's why here, as a SingleMuslim.com relationship coach, we are taking lots of messages and calls. This is what the show's about. And we do customize our sort of advice for you, for your particular need and requirement. And it's really important that you do take this advice and seek that sort of assistance, which is professional, because it's non-judgmental, it is non-directive, it is there, which is fair. And we need to be in sort of like changing our cultural system so that we can involve people just to keep that unit together, because marriage meant to be a really exceptional, pleasurable sort of experience. So we need to obviously have that even with the struggles, so that we can work together. And I really am so happy that you said that, Zisha. It's so important that people understand this. So if there were any
Yes.
sort of like tips and advice for struggling youngsters out there that do have conflict, with their parents? How would they go about not just even saying that we have this issue that we don't agree with, but now we have to also bring in a professional to even come and talk to our family with, when a lot of them actually don't have that insight, thinking that we are in this family, we know better. How is it that someone from the outside is going to come and, give us the best solutions or guidance when we should know better? Because these are parents we're talking about now, not just children.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, one of the things that you have to consider, because, I encourage people to seek counseling. In fact, it's so interesting that in my practice, I've noticed that the population of South Asians has gone up so much, whereas before this was a service that only more Caucasian, other cultures would be seeking out. And I'll tell you why it is helpful to seek help. Because what happens is that when you're in your situation, there's so much fear and there's so much at stake. So when you have a conflict, just like you wanting to protect your money, you go to a financial advisor. When you want to protect your body and your physical health, you go to a physician. When you want to protect your relationships, go to a coach and counselor. And why? I'll tell you 3 reasons why. 1, they're a neutral party. They don't know anything and anybody, but they have expertise in relationships. So when you go to a trained, certified, licensed professional, you are looking at really good, healthy, neutral information that's going to help you. So neutrality. The second element is that when you talk to someone who will listen to you, completely, actively, without any distraction, you get a chance to notice what's in your head. And the problem seems much bigger in your head than it does when it comes out of your mouth. So that's the second element. And the third element is when you talk through stuff, your intensity of how you're feeling goes down. And more the intensity goes down, the more your smart brain is active and you can really think clearly. So when you then approach your family, your chances of success are going to be much higher than your emotional, scared, fatigued self going there. So you go there to untangle, to organize your thoughts, to come up with good arguments that are respectful, to bounce them off of a neutral person who'll say, hey, based on what you've shared with your father, are you sure the statement is not going to backfire? And so you have a person who's looking out for you, who is your ambassador of your life's happiness, but understands your culture and understands what is so important to preserve, because you don't want to start a relationship and have the only extreme option of ending one. You start a relationship to enhance your life. And in our faith and in our culture, we pride ourselves that we take all our relationships together. And
it is a very sensitive issue. It is definitely a sensitive issue. And what I want to say on top of that is, when it comes to our parents, what sort of guidance do you think they need to maybe open up their mindset to? Because obviously they do have insight, and we do respect the fact that they have that insight. And a lot of marriages are successful with the actual support of the family. So when there is real conflict, and there is a very set way of thinking by the parents. Now, what would you, in your experience, sort of maybe give some, shed some light, some of the parents that are watching out there, or some of the, the siblings that are maybe can give this sort of insight to their parents to say that, we love you, we care for you, but our life is also going to continue with you, but in a nice way. So that's something that we do need to consider as to how to be with our parents. Before I go back into that question, we do actually have another comment, which actually states right now, it's from Ghana. And that's from Ghana. Thank you so much for your comments saying cultural pressures don't really help at all, especially family pressures. I guess there's so many people having the same sort of issues out there. So like I was mentioning before, Zisha, how is it that we're going to talk to our parents and maybe give some insight to them, even if it's scary for them? What kind of things now that you would actually maybe say to the parents?
So here's my shout out to the parent. If you are a parent and of an adult child that you are hoping is going to launch into a great, happy life, into a very, very robust relationship, I invite you to consider having a true conversation with them about what is important versus what is your fear, about what is it that you want for them versus what it is that you are protecting for yourself.
Yes.
And when those conversations are transparent, your children can assure you the same way you can assure your children, and it can be a win-win situation. What becomes sad, and what I will invite you to consider, is that your children are smart. They see what is happening. And you risk, when you don't listen to your children, you risk losing that emotional connection or that credibility. And you have to know and have faith in the way you've raised your children, that they will love on you. But I would invite you not to make them pick and choose. Let them choose both, because those are completely incomparable relationships that you need both of. You cannot say, well, I want my wife more than my mother. There is no comparison. Mom has a different role and wife has a different role. Give your son permission to say, I want both, and I want to protect both, and I'm going to love both. Give them
Do you
the
think
tool
our cultures, sorry, I'm going to try and interrupt you quickly because I think it's a really important question and we are coming towards the end of the show. Do you think our cultures are going to continue in the same way, or do you think that slowly it's going to disperse?
I'm going to tell you, our culture is changing. I see very hopeful families, because a lot of times these children and these questions that you are raising, Fahima, these are the kids bringing their parents to therapy. They come scared, and it's hilarious for me because they come completely resisting. What is that? I'm not crazy. I'm not going for counseling. And once they experience it, the children move on and the parents are in therapy, because they've never experienced something like that, where somebody's understanding them and somebody's helping them sort out their own fears. So I am very hopeful that slowly but surely we're changing for the better, without giving up our cultural values, by preserving what's good and adding what's better.
Well, we do have, that's a really good note, but we do have another comment on WhatsApp, which states, why do most British Pakistani families think it's acceptable to get their children married off from back home when there's a huge cultural difference? So do they not understand this? This is a real problem actually at the moment as well. How do you feel about that?
You know, I will tell you that it's definitely an area that needs to be clarified. And I'm hoping, Fahima, that you'll do more shows just about that, because every topic we've touched, we can talk for an hour just on that. And there is a big, big opportunity. And the same happens in the US, where when you marry one person who was born and raised in Britain, for example, and the other partner was born and raised in Pakistan, other than the name British Pakistani, there's barely anything common. There's a huge cultural
difference. Before you even continue, I want to say on that point of you saying that we need to have further conversations, inshallah, I would love to invite you back again to have further discussions on this, because we do have a lot more to actually to be honest, we have so many questions and comments already coming in saying that you need to come back to actually answer more questions with regards to even parents, single parents, and even just parenting and in itself. I think it's another area which I also wanted to ask you, but we're coming towards the end. I don't think I'm going to get the answers straight away. But do we need to even change our parenting styles? I think you've got so much knowledge. And at the end of the day, it's been absolutely amazing to hear you speak, but I still think we've only touched the surface. And I think that there's so much more, and we definitely have to have this conversation again. So, Dr. Sheeza, tell me a little bit before the end. Now, if we are coming towards the end of the show, what is it that you want to highlight from this conversation, especially about the cultural pressures, so that people can take away something and inshallah can have some sort of practical tip for them to move forward with the struggle?
I want to let all of your viewers and listeners I want them to know that their struggles and their challenges are real, to not minimize them, to really be kind to themselves. It is hard. And I know that a lot of times culturally, parents in the Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi, British, and other British, Muslim, Middle Eastern cultures, the parents don't have a supportive and nurturing language sometimes to help their children feel loved and supported. I also want you to know, please know that your parents mean well. It is definitely things that are getting lost in translation. And there is a communication gap that you are struggling with. So know that there's a lot of good intention there, but they just don't have the tools, and they have less tools than you do to work with, because we're all limited by what we know.
Absolutely. No, I think you've ended it so powerful and so strong, and you've given so much insight and awareness. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Speaking to you was amazing, but actually sitting here talking to you has been even more pleasurable for myself, especially, and I know even for all the viewers, especially with all the comments and all the questions that have come about. And thank you so much for the caller as well. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sisha. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really hoping to, inshallah, have you back again at some point in time. Thank you for your time, especially all the way from the US. Please do keep with your messages. Thank you, Sisha.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. These are important topics, and I'm just so impressed that you're bringing them to your community to enlighten them and to take them to the next level.
We will have you again soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheeza. And thank you all of you for watching. Thank you all for your comments and questions. It's been an absolute pleasure today, and I hope, inshallah, that you can move forward with this kind of guidance. And we will definitely attend more Single Muslim live shows in the next episode next week. Take care and have a lovely evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.